Richard Huckle is labelled as the worst child predator to ever come out of the UK. A lot of people think that this man is so evil that he didn't deserve to live after the atrocities he committed. And one vigilante would take it upon himself to give Richard the most brutal death that he could. A murder so vicious that it's been described as poetic justice for the crimes that Richard committed. This is the case of Richard Huckle. So today's video is going to be another solved true crime case on one of the most vile criminals I have ever heard of, who was actually murdered himself. So this is like two cases rolled up into one. But quickly, before we get into the case, I do just want to thank our sponsor for making this video possible, Magellan TV. You guys hear me talk about Magellan TV all the time, but I still feel like it's our little hidden gem. I'm always trying to put people onto this because I think it's great and not enough people know about it. If you're still not with it, let me explain. Magellan TV is a documentary streaming service with the largest and best true crime selection you've ever seen. There's so much content on there to explore. There's all your typical serial killer cases, famous missing persons cases, there's smaller true crime cases from different countries all over the world, from detectives' relentless quests for justice to cults to prison documentaries of inmates actually behind bars. There is so much going on Magellan TV. They also have a lot of conspiracy content that I know a lot of you will be interested in, stuff like aliens, yetis. They even have like paranormal stuff and psychic kind of stuff, superstitious stuff. One of the new releases I watched recently, and I really recommend because it was really interesting, it was called Murder of a Former First Lady. It's all about the death of a woman, a former First Lady named Marieke de Klerk. She was the ex-wife of a former South African president. And one day she was found brutally murdered in her own home. And this was a huge case in the area at the time. Of course, she was a former First Lady. I was so consumed by this documentary. It was really good. I really recommend that one. Oh, and quick reminder, since it's the holiday season, Magellan TV do gift cards. So if you've got a true crime lover in your life or just a documentary lover in general, maybe give them the gift of good content this Christmas. I think that's a really cool, unique, and easy present to give someone. A really good last-minute present as well. And Magellan TV are very kindly offering you guys a 1-month free trial when you sign up using my link down below in the description of this video. Thanks again to Magellan TV for sponsoring this video. Now, before we get into it, I do just want to give my usual disclaimer that I mean absolutely no disrespect to anyone that I talk about in this video. This video is for educational purposes, and everything that I'm about to say is just information that I have found on the internet and I'm compiling into one video. Just a couple of content warnings before we get into this one. Well, I say a couple, but these are some of the most hard-hitting content warnings. This is a really difficult case to listen to because, as I'm sure you can tell from the title, all the victims in this case are children, some even as young as 6 months old, like babies and toddlers, which I know a lot of you won't be able to watch. There are a couple of other themes like incest, CP, kidnap. This is just a really brutal case. So if any of that is something that you don't want to listen to right now, I completely understand. Please look after yourself. Hopefully I'll get to see you again some other time with a different case. But with all that being said, let's get into this case. So let's start out in the very beginning, shall we? This case starts in Ashford in Kent, which is in the south of England. On May 14th, 1986, Richard William Huckle was born to his mother Christina and his father Edwin Huckle. He had a brother too. I'm not sure if this brother was older or younger, but he didn't really come into the case much anyway. The Huckle family were just a very normal, happy, average Christian family. Nothing about them really stood out, apart from Richard, I guess. He was known as kind of the odd kid at school. There was nothing majorly weird about him, but he was just a bit of a loner. He wasn't very social. He did have a couple of friends, but for the most part, a lot of the kids at school thought he was weird. And this made him quite an easy target for, I don't think it was necessarily bullying. I think it was more teasing, shall we say, and I don't think it was personal to Richard. I think these kids targeted a few people like Richard. You know, the weird ones or the quiet kids. They were easy targets for teasing. They would say that Richard looked like a rat. They would make fun of him for not having friends and stuff like that. So Richard did attend a grammar school, which means he was quite intelligent. Well, especially when he was younger, because you had to pass a test to be able to get into this school. But once he was there, he kind of stopped, putting effort in really, and his grades started dropping, and he ended up passing only about half of his classes when he left. He got like 5 GCSEs, and I think the average is like 9 or 10. He did end up going on to sixth form or college, and his academic struggles just continued with his A-levels. A-levels are the next qualification up after high school in the UK. It's something that you do before university, college. It's like you do high school, then you do 2 years of like A-levels, and then university. But yeah, like I said, he just wasn't really interested in school, so he didn't put effort into it. It wasn't like he was struggling. Well, I don't know. He might have been struggling, but he just didn't care. So he wasn't doing his work. The only thing that he was growing increasingly passionate about actually was photography, because his parents had recently bought him a digital camera. I think they bought him it as like a celebration once he finished high school. They bought him a digital camera, and he started carrying it everywhere, taking pictures of everything, and he really, really enjoyed it. He kind of became known in the local area for being the boy with the camera, because he would take it everywhere. People would see him everywhere taking pictures of different things, nature. He would get like candid photos of people. He was just really into it, and he became known for having this camera, and soon people started like asking him to take photos for them. It was actually mainly his church that wanted him involved in this. They wanted him to take photos at like baptisms and other ceremonies that they would hold, and he said yes. He started doing all this work for free for the church. Richard ended up dropping out of his A-levels not long after starting them, because like I said, school was just never his thing, and he saw it as kind of a waste of time. He thought he was going to fail anyway, so why not just write it off and try something else instead of wasting that time? So he went and started a vocational course in photography. He also took an IT course. He was planning to really go like full force with this photography passion. He completed this course aged 19, and he was planning to go off to university, but first he was going to take a gap year. He was super interested in traveling the world and seeing what else was out there, because he traveled a little bit through school. I think with his high school they did like a month abroad, and he really enjoyed it. He really enjoyed helping out there, because I think they went to a third world country, so that was kind of where his heart was helping out like the less fortunate. And he also wanted to go to these kind of countries for kind of selfish reasons as well, just because he thought he'd be able to take some really good pictures out there. He was really trying to build up like a serious portfolio of work now. If he wanted to make this his career, he wanted some good pictures as like examples of what he could do, and he thought that being able to take them over there in like whatever country he chose to go to for his gap year, he thought it would just make him stand out from the rest of the photographers in the UK. So now that he was 19, he was a fully grown adult, he decided to go off to Malaysia in 2005 for his gap year, and he went over there with a bunch of other British students. One of the first things he did over there on his gap year was start helping out at an animal conservation centre, but he quickly realised that this wasn't really his thing. He wasn't really interested in working with animals. He didn't enjoy working with animals as much as he thought he would enjoy working with children. And so he felt like he would fit in a lot better if he was volunteering at, say, like a school or an orphanage instead. And I'm sure you can guess why he wanted to work with children, given the topic of this video, given the title. Richard Huckle had already very much realised that he had an attraction to children. I don't know when he realised that he had this attraction, but he certainly had it at this point. And he wasn't doing anything to stop himself either. In fact, he was actively seeking out opportunities to be around children more. And it's extra scary given the context that he was volunteering to help these children, these less fortunate children. That puts him in a position of trust with these children and with the adults that work with the children as well. He is immediately deemed trustworthy. So he tried to apply for a change in the volunteer scheme. He asked to be put in either an orphanage or like a school or something, but unfortunately all the childcare kind of spots were full, and so Richard was going to have to stay cleaning up animal poo for a bit longer. Until finally a spot opened up at one of the local schools. They needed a couple of people to come in and teach the kids English, and as soon as this was sent to Richard, he jumped at the opportunity. He was like, yes, sign me up. He was paired up with a woman named Sammy. They were both on the same volunteer program. They were both put into the same school, and they were both actually put together in an apartment, to live together. So they lived together, worked together, they were in each other's lives a lot. And Sammy noticed quite a few weird things about Richard that she'd always just brushed off. Things like he was very socially awkward, especially with the children, which she found really, really unusual since he'd volunteered to work with kids. You would think those kind of people would be the ones that were good with kids, but he wasn't. And it wasn't even just with the kids. He was also weird with the adults in the school. She said that he would never really make eye contact with anyone. He wouldn't speak unless he was spoken to. He was just an oddball. He was just an odd guy. But regardless, he seemed to be doing his job fine. He was teaching the kids English fine. But he wouldn't actually be at that school for very long. So the way that he'd actually planned this gap year and this whole volunteer scheme was through a company called World Challenge. And they basically help young people who are going on a gap year to plan it all and figure out what they're going to be doing when they get out there. Well, staff at World Challenge had discovered a blog that Richard Huckle was writing, an online blog, and he was talking the most ish about other people on the World Challenge program, which is kind of not really allowed. You can't do that. You can't do that. Yeah, he was talking really, really badly about these other students on the World Challenge program, and even about some of the kids that he was teaching in the school. And so as soon as World Challenge found out about this, they had to tell him off. I don't know exactly what he was saying, but it was serious enough that they got him taken out of the school that he was in, and they got him taken out of the whole group that he was in. He was moved away from Sammy. They kept him on the World Challenge program, but they just wanted him away from that group. And so they took him out of there, and they ended up getting him a volunteer spot at a church to do Sunday school stuff with the kids. And this was hardly a consequence or a punishment for Richard, being taken out of this school and put into another school on his own this time, where he didn't have Sammy to watch his every move. This was actually a reward for Richard. This is exactly what he would have wanted. And now that it was him alone at this church, he was the only Brit there that worked there, his behaviour started to get scary. This church has since been referred to as his hunting ground, because this is where he would meet most of the children that he would later go on to abuse. He would befriend the children's parents and the church staff. He would gain everyone's trust, and he would use that to get to the kids. So his main thing in the beginning was mainly photographing the children. It started off more sexually suggestive. He would pose the children, and over time he started undressing the children. Some of the photos were partially clothed until they were just fully naked. And that's what it was like for a while. And, just him being too close with the children, having his arm around them when they're just sat there and holding their hand at points. He was just creepy with them as well. Now, one thing about Richard Huckle is that he kept an active diary the whole time that he was on his gap year, which I find really, really interesting when criminals do this, because that's how you get the most raw, personal description of what is going on in their head at the time that they commit their crime. Because that's why I'm so into true crime. Don't know about you guys, but I was doing psychology courses and stuff before I was doing YouTube, because I'm so interested in the psychology of criminals and why they do what they do. So then to have diary entries of what's exactly going on in their brain, I find it so interesting. I always feel like you kind of strike gold when you find diary entries in a true crime case, because it's the most raw insight. And as soon as he started working at this church, Richard's diary entries start taking on a much more sinister tone. I actually have a quote from one of his first entries here. He wrote, "I had some of the children sit down with me for a cuddle. We got out the mattresses and had a relaxed session." Now, it didn't actually take long for Richard to start being accused of abusing the children, but actually not in the way that you might think. One of the parents actually accused him of hitting their child, which is a whole other claim in itself, which I really don't know enough about to say for certain whether it's true or not. But as soon as these accusations came out, they were brought to the World Challenge programme and they immediately dropped Richard Huckle. They didn't want to be associated with him or be seen to be facilitating that, because of course they were the ones that got him the job at that church. So immediately they cut ties with Richard, got him removed from the church. The pastor of the church actually put out a statement or something, I believe, saying that Richard was never alone with the children. He was never left with these kids unsupervised. He was always supervised at all times. And so the pastor was actually denying that anything had happened. This was like a defense statement, not an apology statement for having this guy in the church. And it's all a straight up lie as well, because we know that Richard did have access to those kids alone in that church. The pastor is literally just trying to save face here. In his official statements, the pastor seemed like he was absolutely disgusted in Richard, like he was denouncing him as a person. But then within a week of Richard getting sacked from the church, he was back because the church had hired him again. The pastor had wanted him back in the church. They had hired him independently now, completely separate of World Challenge. So now it was even more scary because there was no mediator in the middle. Before, when World Challenge was there, they could check on him, they could make sure that everything was going safely, which is what they tried to do. They'd moved him around, they got him kicked off programs when they'd found out different accusations. But now there wasn't that safety net there. It was just Richard directly hired by this dodgy seeming church. So Richard is 19, maybe 20 years old at this point in the case, and he decides he really likes Malaysia and he doesn't plan on going back to the UK anytime soon. So he might as well start getting to grips with life over there a little bit more. So he started learning the local language. Well, it was more so like the language that was spoken within his church. It was called Tamil. And this allowed him to gain people's trust even more because he seemed like one of them. If he can speak the local language, then of course they're going to trust him a million times more than they already do, because they already trusted him way more than they should have. And honestly, the reason that Richard seemed to like Malaysia so much wasn't because of the country, it wasn't because of the culture, it was because of how easy he found it to prey on children there. With it being a third world country, the policing would have been nowhere near as severe as in the UK. Like, the crimes that he could get away with over there, he would never in a million years get away with over here, just because, like, honestly, the policing and the law enforcement whole setup is a lot more stringent here in the UK. It was very, very exploitative. He knew exactly what he was doing. That was the only reason this man had moved across the world, moved to a different continent, and was now learning another language, was solely so that he could abuse children. He was putting in so much effort just to be able to do this. Oh, and one thing that I actually forgot to mention was that when Richard was dropped from the World Challenge programme, he was actually left homeless because they provided his accommodation and they thought by taking that away from him, he would then have to move home to the UK. But he didn't do that. He just stayed homeless in Malaysia, which hadn't actually posed too much of an issue to him, to be fair. You would think that would be quite an inconvenience, but not for Richard Huckle, because he had managed to gain the trust of so many people in this community that families were volunteering to house him. They were giving up their sofas, their, spare beds or whatever to this man, because they trusted him and they were friends with him at this point. Richard Huckle was borderline worshipped by this community for absolutely no reason, honestly. I think it was mostly because they thought he must be really wealthy and intelligent and successful to have been able to move over to Malaysia. Because of course no one in the area where he was staying could ever afford so much as a plane ticket to get out of the country. Never mind a plane ticket and then afford to build up a life in another country. They viewed this man as some otherworldly being for being able to do this. And of course there was the fact that he worked in the church and he was bothering to learn their local language, and he was a photographer. He seemed to be there for a purpose. He didn't seem to have any ill intentions. He was taking photos of the ceremonies and stuff. He was an active member of the church. Why wouldn't they trust him, honestly? They just never really questioned him, and he seemed fine, and so these families took pity on him and housed him and cooked all his meals for him, and this allowed him even more access to the children. He was literally invited, welcomed into their homes where he would abuse them. There was one particular family that Richard started getting close to, and he lived with them for a period of time. This family had a little girl who was just 2 years old when Richard first came into her life. This family actually attended the church, and when they found out that Richard was homeless, they took pity on him. They were one of the families that invited him into their home with open arms. But unbeknown to the parents of this family, Richard had sinister intentions. He was attracted to their 2-year-old daughter, and she would sadly become Richard Huckle's first ever confirmed victim. I say confirmed because it is believed that he did have victims before this, but they just don't know who they were or when they were, where they were. This is the earliest one that can actually be confirmed. Over the next year or so, Richard would live with this family most of the time, and he would continually rape and sexually abuse this little girl, this toddler, without her parents' knowledge. And he even documented this abuse from time to time with his camera. He would photograph it, he would video it, and then sometimes he would even make this little girl watch back the footage of him abusing her, and he would force her to relive it. And for some time now, Richard had been posting these awful photos he'd been taking of these children on pedo forums on the dark web. All the photos he'd been taking of those kids in the church, they were all online. He went by the username Huckle, and I found a few of like the comments that he'd put on other people's photos. He was saying things like beautiful child and cute, happy, smiley children, which really made me shudder because those are quite normal words to use about children. I know I've probably used every single one of those words to describe a child at some point, but it's just so, like, when you know the context of that in his head, when you know in what way he means those words, it's just so icky, it's sickening that, like, in his head, that means something different, you know? And Richard was actually making money posting this depraved content. Other paedophiles would bid on his photos and on his videos. They would anticipate new uploads from Richard Huckle because he was posting so often that, like, people liked him on this forum. And he ended up, through posting this CP, he was making, honestly, more money in a month than most people. And he was making friends with these other paedophiles on these forums. They would tell each other their stories and give each other updates on their new relationships. Richard had told them all about this 2-year-old girl that he had been continuously abusing. Well, actually, she was 3 years old by the time he wrote this. He said, "I hit the jackpot. A 3-year-old girl as loyal to me as my dog, and nobody seems to care." In another post, he said, "The 3-year-old I can have so much sex with that it's just boring." And he even closed that with a laughing emoji, which, ugh. He was abusing many more children alongside this. He had like long-term ones, short-term ones. He was constantly cycling in different victims at all times. He had like multiple different victims at once, and they all suffered in the exact same ways. He would photograph most of them, and given the opportunity, if he could get alone with these children, he would go further. He would rape them. He would do awful things to them. And he wasn't really picky when it came to choosing his victims either. He didn't care if it was a boy or a girl or what they looked like. All he cared about was that they were a child, because he was just attracted to all children. And most of his victims were so young as well, like I said, like actual babies, toddlers, children that hadn't even turned 1 yet. Because obviously the children's names in this case are all protected, so as I was reading articles, they were saying things like the 3-year-old girl and the 4-year-old boy, 5 and 6-year-old siblings. It was just heartbreaking to just read these tiny little numbers over and over again. And that was another thing, actually. He would go for a lot of siblings, I presume because it's easier to just get past one set of parents, manipulate one set of parents, and you get access to multiple children, so he went for siblings quite a lot. You can tell how much thought he put into his methods, can't you? He was really, really calculated with it all, and so much so that he decided to write a manual, a guide for other paedophiles to be able to follow in his footsteps and do things the way that he did things, because he was kind of renowned on these forums for having a good success rate, because he was one of the users that was able to abuse the most children. And these other paedophiles on these forums looked up to Richard Huckle. They aspired to be like him and to have a success rate like him. And so he knew that this guide was going to do very well. The manual was titled Paedophiles and Poverty, Child Lover Guide. And a lot of it talks about how the best victims are those in seriously impoverished third world countries, the most vulnerable children on this planet. And so his main tip was for paedophiles to travel for it. Richard's exact words in one of his posts about the manual read, "Impoverished kids are definitely much, much easier to seduce than middle-class Western kids." The manual was 60 pages long, 60, and it had like detailed instructions from start to finish on how to pick your victim, how to lure them in, how to manipulate the parents, everything. And he was a master at it by now. He had his technique down. He said that one of the best things you could do is offer the child's parents a free service, and if they are so poor, they're not going to turn it down, are they? They're not going to turn down a free service. His main thing was photography. He would go down to the beach and approach families and say, "Hi, I'm a professional photographer, and I would like to take photos of your children, and I'll send you them for free. Give me your number, give me your email, I'll send you them for free." And these families always said yes, because this seemed harmless. It seemed, nice of him, actually. Of course, they didn't know why he wanted those pictures. They didn't know his intentions with those pictures. They just knew that they weren't going to get an opportunity like this again. A lot of families didn't have access to cameras, let alone these like really good professional digital cameras, and they wanted these memories of their children. Here was this man offering to give them a free memory of their children having fun on the beach, and they were like, "Yeah, of course, take pictures of our kids," and then he would then post those pictures online. Another way that he would do this, another service that he would offer, was he actually offered to teach people English, both parents and kids. So that was another way he would get it literally inside their houses, was by offering lessons. And again, this was something no one wanted to turn down, because learning English is such a valuable skill, and these parents knew that. They knew how important this could be for their kids. It could give them so many opportunities in the future, and a lot of these families couldn't afford to give their kids English lessons. And again, here's this man offering it for free. Of course, they're going to accept it. And it would work almost every damn time. I hate that this man had managed to find such a flawless and replicable plan that he could just do over and over again as many times as he wanted, and it was always going to work. And he knew that too, and that's why he was writing this manual, because he did have the highest success rate of all these people on this forum, and people wanted to learn his ways. He once posted on one of these forums, "It will likely take something very serious to get me to stop or slow down, but if I'm not suffering consequences, what is there for me to learn from?" Now, one of these websites that he was a regular member on the dark web was called the Love Zone, which immediately made me shudder when I read it, because you know exactly the kind of content on that website, and to call it something like the Love Zone, ugh. It was, of course, a paedophile network where these people would exchange their own homemade content with each other. In fact, it was actually a rule on this website that you had to be a regular poster or your account would be deleted. There was like a 30-day limit. If you went more than 30 days without posting your own original content to that website, your account would be deleted. So there's incentive there. The model of this website is encouraging its users to go out and abuse children, to capture it on camera and then upload it for other paedophiles. There was also a ranking system on this website where you would kind of earn like points or something for the more content you uploaded, the higher you would go in this rank, and it was essentially kind of like a leaderboard. And of course, Richard Huckle was one of the top users. Richard also had his own personal game that's kind of similar to the ranks that he would play in his diary, where he would award himself pedo points. And the way that he earned these points was honestly sickening. He had this scale from 1 to 15, and he would award himself from 1 to 15 points depending on what act he had committed. And these points went up in categories at like increasing in severity. So 1 point, 2 point, 3 points, that kind of thing would be photographing the children, would get him a lower point score. And I don't even want to know what would be up in categories 14 and 15 that would earn him maximum points. And it just the whole, that in itself, minging, the whole concept of this game just makes me, it makes me so ill, because this man was clearly so excited about what he was doing that he was going straight home after abusing these children to write about it in his diary, to award himself points, to give himself a reward. He wanted to add it to his little tally. That's all these kids were to him, was just objects to use and abuse. He didn't care about the consequences this had on them for the rest of their lives, the trauma that they were going to go through. This was a game to him where he was awarding himself points. So, as I'm sure you gathered, Richard Huckle, of course, stayed in Malaysia long after his gap year, because he saw no reason to move home. He knew that he wouldn't be able to get away with half of these crimes back in the UK, so he wanted to stay in Malaysia. Well, he did travel around for a little bit to other third world countries, places like Cambodia, India, places where he knew he could continue to commit these crimes the exact same way he was in Malaysia. He wasn't going to stop. In fact, when he was in Cambodia, he even kidnapped 2 young girls, 2 sisters that were aged just 4 and 6 years old. And I thought that was important to mention, because I think that's the first and only time he's ever committed kidnap. But in 2013, he was permanently back in Malaysia. He'd finished traveling and he'd gotten himself a place in Malaysia. And he was consistently abusing this same little girl from the ages of 5 to 12. This was a very prolonged one. Other victims would kind of cycle in and out of his life, but sometimes he would have these 1 or 2 victims that he would like really attach to. This girl in particular, he wanted to marry one day. He wanted to have children with her. And then he even toyed with the idea of potentially abusing his own children that he was going to have with this girl. He thought about it for a little while and eventually came to the conclusion that he didn't actually agree with incest, and so he wasn't going to do that. In fact, he decided to change the whole plan. Now he wasn't going to have children with her. They were going to adopt, so that he could still abuse his own children, but they just genetically wouldn't be his. That's still so rancid. He used to post about this one particular girl quite often on these forums, and he had been over the years because he'd known her since she was 5. And he would post things like, I hope you guys have all enjoyed watching her grow as much as I have. There was another girl that he'd made a post about, a 5-year-old girl that he was also abusing at the time. Well, it was on her 5th birthday that he posted this. So he knew that she was turning 5, and Richard offered to her family to take her out for the day to celebrate. And they let him. They let him just take their daughter away alone. Before they were going to go out to celebrate her birthday, this little girl went to Richard Huckle's house, and I'm sure you can imagine what happened. He abused her, photographed it, and later posted the photos with one of the most disgusting captions I've ever heard. He said, "You can probably tell from her expression that she wasn't most pleased, but that's the small price to pay when nobody else is interested in celebrating your birthday." He was truly just a horrid, evil person, and luckily it wouldn't be long until the police were onto him, finally. And it was actually the Australian police that got wind of Richard Huckle's crimes first, because they actually had a department over there in Australia that knew about the Love Zone, this website, and they were dedicated to trying to take it down. Police had spent months analysing this website and just keeping tabs on it, keeping tabs on the most active users, of course, one of them being Richard Huckle. But before we talk any more about that, we need to talk about someone else first. They first closed in on another man, another user. I actually think he could have been the owner of the Love Zone, not too sure though. His name was Shannon McCool, and the way that they closed in on this guy was so old school detective. I love it. They noticed that this one particular user always started his posts with hires, which is really unique. I don't know anyone that says hires, like random. So they really clung to this, and they started searching for other posts elsewhere on the internet that were always started with hires. and they came across a social media account. It was a Facebook page that was very clearly like a burner account. It had like a weird like fake name, and none of the pictures had any people in it, but there was one picture. I think that this user had posted in a car sales page on Facebook. It was really quite obscure. They'd done a lot of like digging to find this. And they found that this user had posted a photo that had a car in the background, and the car had a license plate on it. So they put this license plate thing into the system, and they found who owned this car. It was Shannon McCool. They found that this guy, Shannon McCool, had been a childcare worker for over 10 years, which they immediately knew how he'd been accessing so many victims for so many years and been able to post on the Love Zone so much. It was through his work. And up until this point, police had been finding it really, really hard to be able to like properly access the Love Zone. Obviously, because of all the different rules, police do not want to be posting content on there every 30 days. It was hard for them to get like proper internal access until they went and arrested Shannon McCool. When they moved in and arrested him, he literally had the Love Zone open on his laptop. And they got the idea to just pretend to be him. Like, just take his account. Just pretend to be Shannon McCool. So now police have an in with this website, and they are keeping tabs on the most active users, of course. Richard Huckle is one of them. In fact, he was top priority out of all of them, mainly because of the sheer volume of content that this man was posting. Like I said, he was one of the top users because he was managing to abuse so many children so often and photograph it so often. He was clearly one of the most dangerous people on that website. He needed stopping as soon as humanly possible. And it was also his attitude as well. Of course, his actions are disgusting enough on their own, but his attitude towards it all, like, remember the birthday post, and like he just had this huge ego. He thought he was like king of the pedos. He would always talk about the legacy that he was leaving behind with his content. He wanted to be remembered in the community. It was all just so sickening. So police got to work trying to take him down, but of course it was going to be very, very hard because all the pedophiles on these forums know how to stay anonymous. They think about pretty much everything. They don't let their identity slip, like, at all. They will blur as much as they can in photos. Richard had been blurring everything from the children's faces to like distinctive things in the background. Like, he wasn't letting anything past. But there was one thing that Richard forgot to delete from the metadata of his pictures, and that was the type of camera that the photos were taken on. Police now knew the make and model of his camera. It's the most obscure lead in the world, isn't it? But that was all police had. And I mean, they also kind of managed to deduce that he was living somewhere in Southeast Asia. And again, that's very vague, but this is all they had on this man. So they started searching up on like photography websites like Flickr. They were searching up photos that had been taken in Southeast Asia on this particular make and model of camera. And they very quickly came across an account that seemed to be Richard Huckle. It had a very similar username to his username on the Love Zone, and most of the photos on there were of children. They were legitimate photos of like clothed children at church services. You know, he would only post the normal pictures, but immediately everything's matching up. They can tell that this is the same person taking the same pictures on both websites with the same camera. This account actually had Richard's email address connected to it, and so that gave police access to a lot. Like, he'd used this email address for so many other things, Facebook, everything. His Facebook account with that same email address was fully like his own name and everything. It was the Richard Huckle Facebook account with photos of him on it, and honestly, most of his photos on there were of him and children. Like him with his arms round them and them like smiling in photos, which is so horrid when you remember that this man is actively sexually abusing the children in these photos and then pulling them in front of a camera and making them smile with him. And then he goes and posts these photos on his public Facebook account, and people back home are commenting things like, "Oh, so cute." And they don't know that he is raping these kids behind closed doors. So right now, police in Australia have enough evidence to be able to arrest Richard Huckle. But it's not that easy, obviously, because Richard is all the way over in Malaysia, and he's also a British citizen. So it's like, whose responsibility is it to arrest him? Is it Australia? Is it Britain? Is it Malaysia? At the moment, it was Malaysia because he is in their country. So Australian police get in touch with British police because he's a British citizen. They tell them everything. And then British police get in contact with Malaysian police and they say, look, this guy is so dangerous, so abusive. Please go and arrest him right now. And Malaysian police hear this and they're like, oh, I just don't think we've got enough evidence. What do you mean? What do you actually mean? We've got so much evidence. But they didn't think that they did. And so Malaysian police just left it. They did nothing. And for the next 4 months, Richard Huckle was just free and still abusing children. Police weren't even watching him. They didn't even investigate at all. It's so frustrating that this was able to continue for another 4 months when they knew full well that he needed arresting. Luckily though, Richard would bring himself back to the UK voluntarily in December of 2014. Police noticed that he had posted a Facebook status about going back home to visit family over Christmas and he was going to be back on December 19th. And immediately police jumped at this opportunity because they knew that as soon as he stepped foot on British soil, as soon as that plane landed, they could arrest him. If Malaysian police weren't going to do it, British police were. And so on the 19th, they got themselves down to Gatwick Airport, and as soon as Richard Huckle's flight landed in the airport, they arrested him. He was aged 29 at this point. He was taken straight to the police station for questioning, but he wasn't saying nish. He was keeping his mouth shut. Only time he would open it is to say no comment over and over. So police had obviously seized all of his electronics, laptop, phone, everything, but all of it was deeply encrypted. So many layers of encryption that they couldn't get into it. They probably could, given a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of dedication to get cracking all these encryption layers. But right now, they needed access, and Richard refused to give over any passwords. So police were going to have to go the long way. They knew they were going to be able to get access to it in the end. It'd just be a lot more helpful if he would just give the passwords, but he wouldn't. So at this point in time, they're at quite a temporary dead end because they can't find anything on his electronics. He himself is not saying anything. They don't actually have much evidence against him. So what can they do? They can't really do anything right now. They ended up having to release Richard Huckle on bail, but on one condition, that he stays at his parents' address and doesn't move, doesn't fly back off to Malaysia. So he went home to his incredibly shocked and confused and devastated family. Of course, they hadn't had any clue about any of this. And now police are telling them that their son is this monster that's been abusing upwards of 100 children the whole time he's been away. They were honestly disgusted with these allegations made against their son. And so the next morning, his mum confronts him in the kitchen and she's like, look, just tell me if this is real. I need to know if this is true because it's so serious, isn't it? I couldn't even imagine finding that out about your son. And that morning, he just cracked and confessed to his mother that, yeah, it's all true. His parents were so horrified at these admissions that they immediately rang the police and practically begged them to get down to the house as quick as they could and take him away, arrest him, just get him out of their house. They didn't want him there any longer. And apparently still to this day, the Huckle family never talk about Richard. No one ever mentions it. They're all so embarrassed and disgusted that this man was ever a part of their family. So police came down to the home and arrested Richard Huckle, who was now admitting guilt. He was arrested on over 80 counts of sexual offences against children. So his initial court hearing took place in January of 2016, where Richard Huckle actually pled not guilty to all of his charges, and so a trial had to be set. In fact, 3 different trials were set because the judge at the court hearing deemed all that content, because there was a lot of photographs and videos that were going to have to be shown in court, a lot of stories, a lot of testimonies, and it was so much that the judge thought it would just be inhumane to put one jury through all of that. He thought that the easiest way to do this, the easiest way on people's mental health to do this, would be to separate it up and put 3 different juries through less of it, And the juries, all 3 juries were even given free therapy. They were offered free therapy after these trials because it was just so horrifying. In total, police managed to find over 20,000 photos and videos on Richard Huckle's devices. And that wasn't even all of it. They knew they couldn't get through most of the encryption layers, so that's only like a little fraction of how much he actually had on there. 1,000 of those 20,000 were his own original content. And remember, he made so much money from that as well, which just adds a whole other layer of sickening to this. It's believed that Richard Huckle had over 200 victims in his time, all under the age of 12, the youngest actually being just 6 months old. In April of 2009, Richard actually accepted a plea deal where he pled guilty to just 71 of the 90 charges that he was facing. For this, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 25 years, and he was sent to a prison up in Yorkshire. Well, he was sent to quite a few, but mainly the one in Yorkshire is where he spent most of his time. By the way, when he was in prison, Richard Huckle actually entered into a relationship with a serial killer that we've covered on this channel. If you remember the grinder killer, Stephen Paul. That was a really, really old video. Let me recap you if you did see that one. Thanks, by the way, if you did. But he was a serial killer that targeted young gay men. He would lure them in from dating apps, giving him the name the grinder killer. He would kill them, and then I think he left them in like a graveyard. He left their bodies in a graveyard. So yeah, he and Richard Huckle had a open secret of a relationship, it's been described. It was like everyone knew, but they never really said it outwardly. Yeah, the two of them were dating in prison. And I know you've read the title of this video, you know what's coming in the end here. One day, in October of 2019, Richard Huckle would meet a very deserving fate. So Richard was in Full Sutton Prison, which is in East Yorkshire. It's a category A and B prison, which is like, you know, top leagues of like the worst of the worst criminals. He was in there with a lot of like dangerous people, including a man named Paul Fitzgerald. Paul was a registered sex offender. He was serving time in Full Sutton at the time for sexual assault. I believe he tried to rape a woman at knife point. And so he was in prison alongside Richard Huckle. And one thing about Paul was that he was very, very mentally ill, although I don't think he was medicated at the time. He was quite a madman. Like, he talked often about having fantasies about killing people. As far as I'm aware, he'd never killed anyone before, but he really wanted to try it, and he really wanted to eat human flesh. He wanted to murder and cannibalize someone, and he would just say this so openly. He had a lot of sick fantasies, like not even just murder and cannibalism, like I can't even get into it, and I don't even know the full extent of it. I don't want to know, honestly. And on one particular day, Paul Fitzgerald was clearly very, very mentally ill, and he decided that he wanted to kill a few of his fellow inmates, and he was going to start with Richard Huckle, who was now 33 years old. On October 13th, 2019, Paul subjected Richard Huckle to an hour and 20 minutes of constant torture. He started by tying his wrists and his ankles so that he couldn't run away, he couldn't fight back. Paul gagged Richard and strangled him with a cord for a while. He also bashed his head on the floor of this cell that he'd locked them in. He bashed it over and over again until he broke his jaw. There was blood everywhere. He raped him, he beat him, he sodomized him with a spoon. He then shoved a pen up his nose that he'd actually attached a blade to, so he shoved this blade all the way up his nose and into his brain. And finally, when staff realised that these two criminals were missing, they rushed to the cell and they found Richard Huckle dead on the ground, in like just covered in his own blood. And Paul Fitzgerald was still straddling him. When the staff found Paul, he just looked up at them and laughed and said that he really enjoyed it, and had they not come and found him, he would have gone on to kill another inmate. He also said that if he'd had the facilities to do so, he would have cooked and eaten Richard's body, because that's something that he'd always wanted to do. But obviously he couldn't like do that in a prison cell. But anyway, Paul had some time added on to his sentence. At the end, he was given a life sentence for doing this to Richard, and I don't think he'll ever be released from prison. And he still doesn't regret doing it to this day. I don't know if he's medicated now, because he was clearly very mentally ill. Hopefully he is getting some help, because those kind of fantasies are not something that you want with a dangerous person like that. But that is all I have on this case. Thank you so much for watching. This one was a really, really interesting one, albeit one of the most soul-destroying cases I've ever covered. But I find these ones really interesting where it's kind of like 2 in 1, where a person will commit their own crimes and then later be murdered themselves in prison. We've covered a couple of cases like this, but I find them so interesting for some reason. If there's any more cases like this that you want me to cover, leave them down below in the comments, because I will. I'll do it. Thanks again to Magellan TV for sponsoring this video. Remember, they're offering you guys a 1-month free trial when you click the link down below in the description of this video, and I think it's a really cool service. I really do genuinely recommend. A huge thank you to all of my channel members for supporting the channel and helping me decide the cases that I cover. All of my tier 2 members are on screen right now, so thank you so much. If you want to become a channel member, you can click the join button down below. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please leave a thumbs up on this video. That would really help me out. If you want to subscribe to my channel, I reckon you should. Here's a little circle with my face in. If you click on it, it'll let you subscribe. Or if you want to watch another true crime video, there you go, darling. Picture one out. Picture one out. Don't say I don't treat you. Anyways, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.